Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The scars on my wrist appear each morning. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The First Mark. Emma's eyes fluttered open to the first rays of morning sunlight seeping through the blinds. The soft hum of her alarm clock buzzed quietly, a reminder that another day awaited. She stretched, feeling the familiar ache in her muscles from the late-night work session. But as her gaze fell on her wrist, a jolt of unease shot through her. A fresh scar marred her skin, a jagged line that seemed to glow faintly. Emma's heart pounded as she examined it, her fingers tracing its uneven edges. It was as if someone had drawn it with a knife while she slept. She frowned, trying to recall if she'd bumped into something or maybe scratched herself during the night. Nothing came to mind. The scar didn't seem to fit with any past injuries. It was too deliberate, too precise. Emma shook her head, trying to brush off the unease. It was just a minor injury, she told herself. She went about her morning routine, though her mind kept drifting back to the scar. At work, her concentration wavered. Her colleagues noticed her distracted demeanor but attributed it to her recent personal loss, a breakup that had left her emotionally raw. When Emma woke the next morning, the scar had worsened. It was now a deep, crimson line, throbbing slightly. Panic set in. She had hoped it was just a figment of her imagination. But the reality was far more disturbing. She inspected it closely in the mirror, trying to convince herself that there had to be a rational explanation. But the more she looked, the more unsettled she felt. Her friend Sarah, who had been a pillar of support through her breakup, called that afternoon. "Hey, Emma," Sarah's voice was warm and familiar. "You sound off. Everything okay?" Emma hesitated. "It's nothing, really. Just a weird scar that appeared on my wrist. It's growing, and I don't know why." Sarah's tone shifted to concern. "Emma, that doesn't sound like nothing. You need to get it checked out." As Emma tried to brush off Sarah's worry, the truth was sinking in. The scar was more than just a mysterious mark. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. Her sense of normalcy was slipping through her fingers, and a shadow of dread began to settle over her. Emma knew one thing for sure: something was terribly wrong. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Emma's nights had become a battleground of torment. Each morning, the scar on her wrist had evolved into a fresh, grotesque version of itself. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, each day darker and more distorted. The once small mark had now spread across her wrist like an intricate web of horror. Her days were a blur of meetings and work, but her nights were filled with relentless nightmares. She dreamt of dark, shadowy figures that loomed over her, their faces indistinguishable, but their intentions clear. They whispered her name in chilling tones, their voices blending into a cacophony of dread. The nights left her waking up in a cold sweat, the scar burning as though it was alive. At work, Emma's distraction was becoming impossible to ignore. Her boss, Mr. Thompson, shot her concerned glances as she stumbled through presentations and missed deadlines. "Emma, are you all right? You seem off," he remarked one day, his brow furrowed with concern. "I'm fine," Emma replied tersely, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired." Sarah had noticed the change as well. Over lunch at their favorite cafe, Sarah's worry was palpable. "Emma, you're not yourself. This scar, are you sure it's not something more serious?" Emma hesitated, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I've seen a doctor. They couldn't find anything wrong. It's just affecting me more than I thought." Sarah's expression hardened. "If the doctors can't help, You should see a therapist. There might be something more going on." Emma reluctantly agreed. She found herself in a sterile, brightly lit office the following week, sitting across from Dr. Wallace, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, but a serious demeanor. As Emma recounted her experiences, her voice trembled. Dr. Wallace listened intently, then said, "Emma, it sounds like you're dealing with significant stress and anxiety. The appearance of the scar and your nightmares might be connected to these feelings. Sometimes our mind manifests physical symptoms as a way of dealing with internal conflicts." Emma nodded, though she struggled to accept the explanation. The idea that her mind could conjure such a grotesque mark seemed almost too surreal. Nevertheless, she began attending therapy sessions, where she was encouraged to explore her emotions and past traumas. As days turned into weeks, Emma's paranoia grew. The scar's presence seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of her mental instability. Her colleagues and friends became increasingly distant as Emma's erratic behavior drove a wedge between them. She avoided social gatherings, isolating herself in her dimly lit apartment, where the shadows seemed to grow more oppressive with each passing day. Her life was unraveling, and the scar seemed to be the catalyst for a deeper, darker unraveling within her. The whispers from her nightmares grew louder, and Emma could no longer distinguish between the waking world and the horrors that haunted her. She knew one thing for certain: the scar was only the beginning of something far more sinister. Chapter 3: The Connection. The therapy sessions with Dr. Wallace became a refuge for Emma, a place where she hoped to find answers buried beneath her growing paranoia. Each visit began with the same routine. She would sit in the leather chair, facing Dr. Wallace's calm but probing gaze, and recount the relentless horrors that plagued her nights. One rainy afternoon, as the raindrops pelted the windowpane, Emma spoke of her latest nightmare, a figure cloaked in darkness, whose eyes seemed to pierce through her very soul. Dr. Wallace listened, his expression thoughtful. "Emma, I believe there's more to these nightmares than mere stress," he said gently. "You mentioned a childhood event. Can you tell me more about it?" Emma's fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sweater. "There's not much to tell. I remember being scared of something, but the details are fuzzy. I was really young." Dr. Wallace encouraged her to dig deeper. "Sometimes our mind hides traumatic memories as a way of protecting us. The appearance of the scars might be connected to these buried fears." As Emma delved into her past, fragments of memories began to surface. She recalled an old, decrepit house at the edge of her childhood neighborhood, a place she and her friends had been warned never to enter. She remembered a figure, vague and shadowy seen only in fleeting glimpses. The figure had always been accompanied by a cold, unsettling presence that made her skin crawl. Emma's mind raced. Could the scars be linked to that mysterious figure from her childhood? The connection seemed tenuous, but increasingly plausible. To confirm her suspicions, she decided to revisit the old house, now a crumbling relic of the past. That evening, the old house loomed before her, its broken windows like empty eyes staring into the night. As Emma approached, the air grew unnaturally cold. She hesitated, but pressed on, her flashlight cutting through the thickening darkness. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with dust and decay. Emma's footsteps echoed eerily as she explored the main rooms. Suddenly, she heard a soft whisper her name, faint but unmistakable. She spun around, but no one was there. The whispering continued, growing more insistent, as if urging her to remember. Emma's pulse quickened. As she explored further, objects began moving on their own. An old rocking chair creaked back and forth, and a dusty lamp flickered to life before dying again. The supernatural activity heightened her dread, confirming her fears that something malevolent was connected to her scars. She left the house with a sinking feeling, the whispers still ringing in her ears. The connection between the mysterious figure from her past and the scars seemed undeniable. Emma felt a chilling certainty that uncovering this link was crucial to understanding the source of her torment. The shadows of her childhood fears had returned with a vengeance, and she had only scratched the surface of the darkness that awaited her. Chapter 4. Emma's nights grew increasingly unbearable. The scars on her wrist had worsened, now a network of deep, angry lines that pulsed with an unsettling rhythm. Each morning, she awoke to find the marks more pronounced, as if they were feeding on her fear. Her dreams were nightmares of the old house, its shadowy figure growing clearer and more menacing. In her waking hours, the line between reality and nightmare began to blur. Emma felt a constant, gnawing presence, as if someone or something was watching her every move. Shadows in the corners of her apartment seemed to shift and whisper. She caught glimpses of dark shapes out of the corner of her eye, only to find nothing when she turned her head. Determined to understand the origins of her torment, Emma threw herself into research. She scoured historical records at the local library, digging through dusty archives and old newspaper clippings. She learned that the house from her childhood had a dark history. It was rumored to be the site of a series of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths over the years. Local legends spoke of a curse placed upon the property, a malevolent force that preyed upon those who ventured too close. Emma's findings were disturbing. The parallels between the legends and her own experiences were undeniable. The figure she had glimpsed in her childhood seemed to match descriptions of a spectral entity linked to the house. The curse seemed to be a powerful force, manipulating events to instill fear and despair. Her obsession with the research began to take a toll. Emma's behavior grew increasingly erratic. At work, she struggled to focus, her once steady hands now trembling with anxiety. Colleagues and friends noticed her growing agitation. Sarah, her closest friend, grew more concerned with each passing day. One evening, as Emma huddled in her apartment, surrounded by scattered notes, Sarah arrived unannounced. She found Emma hunched over a pile of documents, her eyes wide and wild. "Emma, you're scaring me," Sarah said, her voice trembling. This obsession with the house and the scars, it's taking over you." Emma looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Sarah, I can't stop. There's something wrong, something I have to understand. I'm being watched. I know it." Sarah tried to calm her. "Emma, you need to take a break. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't like you." But Emma couldn't escape the grip of her paranoia. The whispers and shadows seemed to grow stronger, feeding off her fear. Her grip on reality began to slip, and she could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was imagined. As Sarah left, her concern etched deeply in her face. Emma was left alone with her growing dread. The haunting presence had taken hold of her mind, and she felt more isolated than ever. The scars, the nightmares, and the sinister history of the house had intertwined into a nightmarish reality that Emma couldn't escape. The true horror was far from over, and Emma's struggle to retain her sanity had only just begun. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Emma's world had become a relentless storm of fear and confusion. The shadows that haunted her apartment had begun to take shape, their presence almost tangible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, felt like a silent threat. Her scars, now deep and raw, throbbed with an unearthly pain, a constant reminder of the darkness that was consuming her. In the midst of her unraveling sanity, Emma stumbled upon a breakthrough. While researching her family history, she came across an old journal belonging to her great-grandmother. The journal was filled with cryptic entries about a curse and a mysterious ritual that had been performed years before Emma's birth. As she read, Emma's heart raced. The entries spoke of a family secret, a supernatural force tied to her ancestry that had been awakened and was now targeting her. Emma's hands trembled as she brought the journal to Dr. Wallace, desperate for answers. During their next session, she laid the journal out on the table between them, her eyes pleading for clarity. Dr. Wallace examined the aged pages, his brow furrowed. "This is significant, Emma. It seems your family was involved in some sort of dark ritual. According to this, it was meant to bind a malevolent entity, but may have failed, leading to the curse that now affects you." Emma's mind raced. A curse? But why is it affecting me now? What triggered it? Dr. Wallace continued. It appears that the ritual was incomplete. Perhaps something recent has triggered its activation. You mentioned your recent trauma sometimes. Intense emotional experiences can awaken dormant forces. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The connection between her trauma and the curse was becoming clearer. The rituals, meant to protect her family, had instead left a lingering evil that now sought to claim her. Determined to confront the entity, Emma prepared herself for a final confrontation. The journal hinted at a specific time and place for confronting the curse, a secluded grove near the old house. She arrived there as dusk fell, the air thick with tension. The moon cast an eerie glow over the grove, its light flickering through the branches like a strobe of ghostly illumination. As Emma stood in the center of the grove, the air grew colder and a swirling mist began to rise. From the darkness emerged the entity, a shadowy figure with a twisted, featureless face. It radiated a malevolent force, its presence palpable. Emma's heart pounded as the entity's eyes locked onto hers, the intensity of its hatred almost overwhelming. The entity roared, a sound that seemed to rip through the fabric of reality itself. It moved towards Emma with a speed that defied logic. Emma, summoning every ounce of courage, began to chant the words from the journal, hoping to perform a counter-ritual. The entity writhed in fury, its form distorting and shifting with each chant. The air crackled with energy as the ritual took effect. Emma's voice grew hoarse, her resolve tested as the entity lashed out with increasing aggression. She could feel its rage as if it were a physical force. Finally, with a final, desperate cry, Emma completed the ritual. The entity let out a deafening scream before disintegrating into the shadows. The grove fell, and the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the entity was banished. Exhausted and trembling, Emma stood alone in the moonlight, her scars still throbbing, but the supernatural presence gone. The terror had reached its peak, but the confrontation had brought her one step closer to breaking free from the curse. The shadows of her past were momentarily dispelled, but Emma knew the fight was far from over. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The grove was eerily silent in the aftermath of the entity's disappearance. Emma stood there, panting heavily, her body drenched in sweat. The air, once suffused with malevolent energy, now felt oddly serene. Yet, the silence was deceptive. The curse was far from over, and Emma's fight was not yet complete. Over the following days, Emma's scars seemed to heal slightly, but the menace in the shadows remained. The feeling of being watched never truly faded. Determined to end the torment, Emma immersed herself in the journal's cryptic passages, searching for any overlooked details. Her nights were spent poring over the ancient text, her mind racing with worry. One entry stood out, a final incantation, that could supposedly sever the curse's grip entirely. It required a specific location, an ancient stone circle deep in the forest, and an intense ritual performed at midnight. Emma knew she had to follow through, even if it meant risking everything. As night fell, Emma trekked through the forest, guided only by the faint moonlight and her sense of dread. The air was dense with the scent of pine and earth, and every snap of a twig underfoot felt like a harbinger of the terror to come. When she finally arrived at the stone circle, her breath caught in her throat. The stones, weathered by time, loomed ominously, their jagged edges casting twisted shadows. Emma set up her ritual space at the center of the circle, her hands shaking as she arranged candles and chalk symbols according to the instructions. As the clock struck midnight, she began chanting the incantation from the journal. The words felt foreign on her tongue, but she forced herself to continue, her voice unwavering despite her fear. The ground trembled as she spoke, and a chilling wind whipped through the circle. The air grew colder, and a dark mist began to coalesce around the stone circle. Emma's heart pounded as the entity re-emerged from the shadows, more formidable and terrifying than before. Its form writhed and expanded, the dark mist swirling around it like a storm. Desperation fueled Emma's determination. She continued the chant, her voice rising above the howling wind. The entity roared, its fury palpable. It lunged at Emma, its shadowy tendrils reaching for her with a terrifying speed. She could feel its anger, its dark will pressing against her, threatening to extinguish her resolve. Just as the entity's tendrils were about to engulf her, Emma recalled a critical detail from the journal, a final phrase that could potentially banish the entity for good. With a burst of courage, she shouted the phrase, her voice cutting through the cacophony of the storm. A blinding flash of light erupted from the center of the stone circle, and the entity let out a final, agonized scream. The darkness dissipated, leaving Emma alone in the clearing, her body trembling but victorious. The curse was broken. The scars on her wrist had faded, leaving only faint, almost imperceptible lines. The oppressive weight of fear lifted from her shoulders. Emma knew the battle was over, but the journey had changed her forever. She had faced her deepest fears and emerged stronger, but the shadows of her ordeal would forever be a part of her past. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The morning light filtered through the forest canopy, casting a soft, golden glow over the clearing where Emma stood. The stone circle, now silent and still, bore witness to the night's confrontation. Emma's heart was heavy, but hopeful as she surveyed the aftermath of her final battle. The entity was gone, but the scars on her wrist, though faded, remained a reminder of the terror she had endured. Emma returned to her apartment, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from her shoulders with each step. The scars had stopped appearing, but their final faded marks were a permanent testament to her ordeal. As she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, she traced the lines with her fingertips, reflecting on the harrowing journey that had led her here. Sarah had been by Emma's side throughout the turmoil, her support unwavering. Their friendship had weathered the storm of Emma's paranoia and obsession. And now, as Emma recovered, their bond was tested but ultimately strengthened. Sarah visited often, bringing with her a semblance of normalcy and a reminder that life outside the shadows still existed. One evening, as they sat together in Emma's living room, the weight of their shared experiences hung between them. Sarah broke the silence, her voice gentle. "Emma, I know it's been a lot to process, but I'm proud of you. You faced something unimaginable and came out stronger." Emma smiled weakly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You kept me grounded when I felt like I was losing my mind. I'm grateful for that." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for the first time in weeks, Emma allowed herself to relax. They laughed and reminisced about happier times, and Emma felt a flicker of hope for the future. Yet, even as she found solace in the company of her friend, a part of her remained uneasy. The nightmares had ceased, and the oppressive presence that had haunted her was gone. But as Emma lay in bed that night, the shadows seemed to cling a little closer than before. The silence of her apartment felt almost too quiet, and the faintest creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down her spine. She tried to push the doubts from her mind, but a lingering sense of unease remained. Emma's reflection in the mirror, though more composed than before, bore the weight of her ordeal. The trauma she had faced was not easily forgotten, and the lessons learned from her journey were etched deeply into her soul. She had confronted her deepest fears and emerged from the darkness, but the ambiguity of her experience left a subtle hint of lingering horror. As the days passed, Emma slowly resumed her routine. The scars on her wrist, though faded, were a constant reminder of the darkness she had faced. Despite the resolution of her immediate fears, she knew that the echoes of her past would always be with her. The horror might not have been entirely vanquished, but Emma had found a new strength in the face of uncertainty, and with Sarah by her side, she faced the future with cautious hope. Chapter 8. The New Normal. The soft hum of the city outside Emma's apartment window was a welcome change from the oppressive silence of the past weeks. With the entity vanquished and her scars faded, Emma was determined to reclaim her life. She had begun returning to her normal routine work, social gatherings with Sarah, and even small hobbies she had neglected during her ordeal. Emma's first day back at her office felt almost surreal. The familiar clatter of keyboards, the murmur of conversations, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee were comforting, a reminder of normalcy that had seemed so distant. Her colleagues greeted her with warm smiles and sympathetic nods, their concern genuine but overshadowed by relief that she was back. Sarah, ever supportive, helped Emma navigate this transition. They shared coffee breaks and planned weekend outings, trying to infuse Emma's life with joy and distraction. It was a reprieve Emma welcomed, even as a small part of her remained wary. The nights were still punctuated by the occasional unsettling dream, but they were fleeting, not the tormenting visions of before. One evening, as Emma was organizing her closet, she came across a small, dusty box hidden in the back. It had belonged to her grandmother, filled with old photographs and mementos. Curiosity piqued. Emma opened it, her fingers brushing over faded family photos and letters. Amid the keepsakes, she found something that made her blood run cold, a delicate silver bracelet with an intricate design that matched the symbols from the ritual she had performed. Emma's pulse quickened as she examined the bracelet. Had she missed something? Or was there a connection to the past she had yet to fully understand? The bracelet felt cold against her skin, and a shiver ran down her spine. She quickly returned it to the box, her mind racing with unsettling possibilities. Later that night, as Emma prepared for bed, she noticed something new, an unfamiliar, faint scar on her wrist. It was a single, jagged line that had not been there before. Her heart sank. The horror she had fought so hard to escape seemed to be clawing its way back into her life. Emma's mind swirled with questions. Had she truly broken the curse, or had she merely delayed the inevitable? The scar was a haunting reminder that the darkness might still linger, a final twist in her journey. She tried to calm herself, but the sense of dread that accompanied the scar was undeniable. As Emma lay in bed, shadows in her room seemed to stretch longer, and the silence felt heavier. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for something more sinister. The eerie calm that settled over her life was deceptive. The novel concluded with Emma staring into the darkness of her room, the new scar a chilling indication that her ordeal might not be over. The eerie calm left readers with lingering questions about the true nature of the horror and its impact on Emma's life, hinting that the shadows of her past were far from gone.